Hello, everybody, and welcome to this third webinar in our series of free webinars that we're offering to you, coming to you from Tech Forward. Today's webinar is on note-taking. It's called Note-Taking 2.0, and we're delighted to have you all here. I can see people just flocking into the room, and in fact, we had nearly 300 people sign up for this webinar. So we won't be able to have everybody in the room, but we're trying something new. We are live streaming to YouTube, so hopefully some of you will be able to follow along on YouTube if you didn't actually manage to make it into the room with us. And in any case, as always, we'll be posting the recording of the webinar on our website, techforward.com, very soon after it finishes. I can already see some people have found their way to the chat box and they're saying hello. Hello to you all, boy, oh boy. Hello from Milan, from Lima, from Tallinn, all sorts of people joining us, and even those here in Geneva like me. Hello also to my co-host, to Alex. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you, Josh. I'm still in the process of setting everything up. I just realized here that since our YouTube channel is still so fresh and so new, we're not able to live stream there yet. So I have to put it on my private channel. But I'm looking at the live stream right now. I'm just going to publish the URL on our Twitter account. And while I do that, you can just welcome the participants
Great.
as they come in.
Well, I am seeing people coming in from all over the place. Anna Maria from Hamburg, from Italy, from Canada, from Germany, from Argentina, Bern, Sao Paulo, Utah, Normandy, France,
Oh, wow.
Madrid. It is incredible to have so many people here from all across the globe. I see somebody from Cairo. The messages are just flooding in. They're going faster than I can possibly read them.
Yeah, good luck with
People
that.
from Greece, Buenos Aires, Brighton, UK, Manchester, the US, Massachusetts, Montreal, Florida, Ghana. Wow, lots of different options right here. So it's amazing to see so many of you joining us live today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Josh Goldsmith. I am a Geneva-based conference interpreter and half of the duo making up Tech Forward. And I'm joined by the other half of the duo making up Tech Forward, Alexander Drexel. Alex is a staff interpreter at the European Commission, but of course, everything that he does here for Tech Forward, he's doing in a private capacity. And so we are delighted to have you all here with us today. Maybe I'll just start by telling you what we have in store, what we're planning on covering today. So we are talking about digital note-taking 2.0. We'll start with an introduction about why you might want to go digital and how you can go digital. So how you can take paper notes, for example, and digitize them. We'll also talk about how you can annotate notes both from your computer and from a tablet. And then we get to one of my favorite parts of the course, which is about how you can use your tablet for digital note-taking. We're also going to share a very interesting and innovative idea about creating a portfolio of digital notes, and we'll have an interactive activity for you at that point where we will ask you to provide some feedback on some sample notes, and I think it's going to be quite cool. So that is what we have in store for today. As always, you should feel free to pop any of your questions into the chat. We will try to answer them all. We'll look forward to it being an engaging session. And that's pretty much what we have in store for the moment. So I think that brings us to our polls. So we will just pull up that first poll for you. The first poll is a question: do you own a tablet? And it's a single choice question. So your options are just a yes or a no. Just 1 second for Alex to pull that poll up so you can answer
It's
it.
working. At least I can see it. So you should be able to see it too.
Great. So go ahead and answer that poll. If for some reason you can't see it, let us know. I think you might have no poll, Alex, so I think you just have to hit the share button.
It's shared already, at least from where I see it.
All right. Let's try relaunching it one more time, and if not, we will.
Yep.
There we go. Here's the poll. Do you own a tablet? Yes or no? So we'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. I see the responses flooding in. Wow, that's fast. Wonderful. We've got 70 of the 100 people in the room who've already answered. So just a few more seconds to get those people looking for a poll for the first time, to give them a chance to find it and answer the poll. Give you another 5 seconds or so. And I think we can go ahead and close that poll now, and we'll see the answers. So the answers are that 73% of those of you with us today do have a tablet, and 27% of those with us today don't have a tablet. That's perfectly fine. The information we're going to be sharing is relevant whether you have a tablet or don't. It's also relevant if you're thinking about getting a tablet potentially, so we'll be telling you more about that. I think this brings us to our second question now. The second question for you all today is, what kind of tablet do you use? And this is a select all question, so you can pick all
Take it
answers.
slow, Josh. The system is not that quick.
Apply. And here we have it. So there are the options: an iPad tablet, an Android tablet like a Samsung, a Windows Surface, or you don't have a tablet. And I see people are quite quick on the draw now. The answers are flooding in. We'll give you a little bit more time. And I think we will go ahead. 80 of you have now answered. We'll go ahead and close that poll right now. We've got a good amount of diversity among the respondents in the room. 49% of you use iPads, 20% of you have an Android tablet, 13% of you have a Surface tablet, and 24% of you don't have a tablet. And that's perfectly fine, as I said before. Okay, so today we'll be showing you some examples from an iPad, but as you probably know, we have iPad courses and Android courses coming up in the near future. Let's move on to the third poll question for everybody in the room, which is, have you ever used your tablet for interpreting before? The options are yes, no, and I don't have a tablet. Another 5 seconds. We've got almost all of the answers that have already come in. All right, and we'll go ahead and close that poll here. And the no's have won out just slightly in this case, but it's pretty evenly split between those people who've used their tablet for interpreting and those who haven't. I'm sure you're wondering, what exactly does that mean, use your tablet for interpreting? And we'll talk about some possibilities later on. And this brings us to our final question, just to get a sense of the people in the room, which is, what type of interpreting do you do? Now, this question, like some of the earlier questions, is a pick all that apply question. So you can go ahead and pick any types of interpreting that you do for this poll question. We're just launching it right now. Give us one more second.
I'm going to relaunch it.
And here it is. I see it now. So the options are simultaneous, consecutive, liaison, whispered, or sign language interpreting. I know there might be some people in the room who are not interpreters. That's perfectly fine. We are capped at only 5 questions, 5 options we can put up for a poll, so we couldn't add one for none of the above, but that's all right. We'll understand perfectly if that's the case for you. And we will give it another 5 seconds, and then we will go ahead and close that poll and share the results. And here we have them. Just putting them up on the screen for you now. it looks like almost everybody in the room does simultaneous interpreting. 93% of the people responded work in simultaneous, 88% work in consecutive. Quite a few people do chuchotage or whispered interpreting, and some liaison interpreting, and we even have some sign language interpreters in the room, which is wonderful. We're delighted to have you with us today. So that was our last poll question, and I did just want to answer one question that came in the chat box, which was how long are our webinars? All of our free webinars are just about an hour. That's our target length. So we will be with you for the next 50 minutes now. So that brings us to the end of our set of polls. And I think I will go ahead and turn it over to my co-host, Alex, to take it from here for the next bit of today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Just a quick housekeeping remark. If you can take a look, I just sent you a message. I think we need to let a few people know how they can access the YouTube live stream because they couldn't get on the Zoom webinar. Okay, great. Let's take a look at this next slide here. I mean, we kind of wanted to motivate as well what the whole point of going digital is, going digital with your notes. And I think the advantages are probably fairly obvious, but we thought we'd go into this real quickly at the beginning of this webinar. First of all, one big advantage is that you will always have all of your notes available, ideally in one place. And I can give you an example for that as well. I've started going digital with my notes a few years ago. For example, when it comes to doing notes for consecutive interpreting, I use my tablet for that, for example. And I use my tablet not only for actual consecutive interpreting assignments, but also for preparing speeches. So when I give practice speeches to colleagues or to students, I don't type them out, I write them down in consecutive notes, and I do that on my iPad. So I have all my speeches with me at all times. And if somebody asks me, hey, can we do a quick practice session during the lunch break, for example, I can say, sure, no problem, because I have my speeches with me. I don't have to remember to bring a particular notebook or something like that. Also, they will be searchable. Maybe not the notes in and of themselves. They might not be searchable depending on how many symbols and that kind of thing you use and you have in your system. But certainly, if you give a note a good title, maybe with a date and maybe some explanations what this is about, then it will make that very simple and very easy for you to search through your ever-growing note archive and find what you want very, very quickly. Another big advantage is also that the notes will be shareable. So if there's ever something that you have noted down that you want to send to somebody else, share with a colleague or with somebody else, then that is very easy as well. And there are some note-taking applications, like if you look at Apple Notes, which you may have on your Apple device, or if you're more of a OneNote person, or maybe you're using Evernote, you know that notes can be shared very easily just for somebody else to view it, to take a look at it, but it's also possible for people to collaborate on notes. We're not going to go into that today because we don't really have the time during this webinar today, but just to mention that it's out there. So you can have notes that you collaborate on. For example, just to give you a very up-to-date example from the coronavirus pandemic, we're all at home right now. So our family, we have started to make just a meal plan. So we just note down what we want to eat and what we have to buy, of course, in the shops. So we put that in one note that we can all access and that we can all work on and collaborate on. And lastly, it's just very flexible. As I said, since you have all your notes available for you at all times, you have them backed up in the cloud usually as well, which is of course nice to have. You can easily copy them as well. They're searchable. You can share them with others. So all in all, it's just a very flexible solution for you. And in our view, at least, I think it makes a lot of sense, and that explains all of the advantages that we see in getting digital or going digital with your notes. Now, the question is, of course, all of us, we already have a lot of paper notes, maybe old notebooks and random pieces of paper. And now, maybe again, due to the pandemic, we have a lot of time, and we can then we can maybe get into old notes that we have lying around and digitize them. And let me just check. I think we have a quick issue with YouTube here. So let me just fix that link so the others can see us. And then I will immediately get back to the topic at hand. Just a second.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alex. This is the first time we're trying to go live on YouTube, so we apologize for the glitches, but in any case, we are now back in live on YouTube, so everything should be okay. And Alex, I'll let you pick up right where you were there. So you were
Just leave
talking.
that. Yeah,
There we
just
go.
leave that open in the background.
Wonderful.
Okay, so the question was, how do we get our notes from 1.0 to 2.0? That was basically the question. Now, first of all, you may have what we call a flatbed scanner, or a good old-fashioned scanner at home, where you open the lid, you put something in, you close the lid, and you scan it in. That's great. You can use that to digitize your notes as well. Or maybe you have one of those multifunctional devices. That is probably something that you have maybe at work, in your office environment, these big machines that can print and scan, and usually they do these several things at the same time. So that's a possibility for you to use as well. Now, of course, with a flatbed scanner, that will be connected to your computer or maybe laptop. So it's very easy to scan directly to your device. For these multifunctional devices, of course, it depends on your individual office environment to see, how do you get the files? How do you actually get to the files that you've scanned? Sometimes you can just pop in a USB thumb drive, or you can email them to yourself. That really depends. But it's useful if you have that in your office environment, if you have that available. Then, of course, as you know, all your mobile devices have a built-in camera. So you can, of course, use that camera to take a snapshot of something. You can use it to scan. That's the thing. So you can take a simple photo, first of all, but there are also specialized apps like ScanBot, for example, which is kind of the favorite app for Josh and myself. Somebody in the chat mentioned Cam Scanner. Absolutely, that works as well. Microsoft Office Lens is also a very cool app, which has a lot of great functionality to not only take a photo, but then, for example, crop the document, get it just right, adjust the perspective, maybe change the colors. For example, if you want to change from color to black and white, for example, that's very easy with these apps. Scannable is another one that works quite well with Evernote, if I remember correctly. So there's almost an abundance of apps available. And by the way, you will be getting these slides afterwards, so no need to take any notes right now. We'll be sharing the slides and the recording afterwards, so no problem at all. You can always refer back to all that information that we're sharing. Now, there are also specific hardware scanners that can be really interesting if you have a huge amount of documents or a huge amount of notes. For example, the Fujitsu ScanSnap is one of those machines which you should be able to see on the screen right now. It's there in the bottom right corner. So it looks like a printer, but it does the opposite. So you can throw in a big pile of documents and it will just scan it in quickly. I even know some people who take their books to the post office or to the FedEx shop. They cut the spine off, and then you can put almost an entire book into the scanner and digitize it very quickly. And of course, you can do the same with your big pile of notes or other things that you have. Yes, and Corinne, the irony is not lost on us, taking notes in a webinar on note-taking, absolutely. And of course, you can do the same with whiteboards. I actually had a little sort of impromptu whiteboard available with our world domination project that Josh and I are having at the moment. Now, with an app like ScanBot or Office Lens, you can just snap a photo of a whiteboard. It will take a very good photo, turn it into a great image. Sometimes it will also do the text recognition. That's, by the way, a very neat feature, of course, that these scanning apps also have, and these dedicated hardware scanners, is that they try to recognize the text in a given photo, especially when you take a photo of a document or when you have proper handwriting. It also works quite well, actually. And we have more ways of converting handwritten text into typed text a little bit later on. So that works for whiteboards, blackboards, posters, and so on as well. Now we have an attendee raising their hand. Marie, feel free to post your question in the chat. That is probably the quickest way of getting to that. So because we're very pressed for time, it's a little bit difficult to have voice notes here, basically. So if it's okay, maybe just share the question in the chat and then we can get to it. And with this, I will hand it over to Josh for a little bit of an interactive session where you can join in as well.
Great. So yes, we have an interactive session. I've been trying to get that that link to the live stream out to people. Maybe you could just repost it on Twitter, Alex, as well. And this brings us to our question we wanted to ask you all, which is why might you want to annotate notes? What are some of the reasons that it might be worth annotating notes? If you could go ahead and share those ideas with us in the chat box, we'd love to hear them. So why might you be interested in marking up notes and scribbling on them, perhaps in adding some remarks to your notes? What are your thoughts? I'm looking to see some ideas coming in. We'll give you a few seconds to tell us what you think the benefits of annotating notes might be. One thing that I like to do, for example, is if I'm studying, for example, right now I'm learning a new language. I'm learning Portuguese, which I hope to add to my language combination pretty soon. And I look at those consecutive notes and then I can go back through, and where I made a mistake or where I left something out, I can add something in manually, annotating my notes when I'm reviewing them or listening to my recording with a view to having real deliberate practice. So that's something which I like to do. I see some other ideas on here. Thank you, Melissa, for the parabéns. Some people say that it can be very useful for improving your note-taking, reviewing what went well, where there were issues, highlighting terms, highlighting symbols, organizing your notes, updating your notes, perhaps picking out things that you want to add to your glossary afterwards. Absolutely. Yes, being able to find notes again. That's a good question, Heidi. Are we talking only about consecutive or interpreting notes or all types of notes? We're actually kind of talking about all types of notes at the moment. And what we're going to show you is relevant for all types of notes, but then it could also be relevant for consecutive notes. So yes, listening to colleagues, noting nice solutions, all sorts of great ideas in here. I know some people do get rid of their notes after they work, but maybe there are reasons to keep them. And at the end of this session, we are going to talk about how that could potentially be useful if you're training, if you're practicing, and so on. So I see lots of ideas in here, improving nuances, using a different color on your notes if you're getting feedback, using your notes to build glossaries. Absolutely. That's a wonderful idea, Claudio. So lots of wonderful possibilities for why you might want to annotate notes. Now, what I'm going to do now is actually show you a little bit what it's like to annotate some notes. I'm going to give you an example. So I will just pull up some notes on my screen. Of course, what I'm showing you is something that is a public document. I would never choose to show any private documents here. This was just the agenda for a meeting that I did a couple months ago. And if I wanted to annotate this, I'm using a program called Preview, which is a free program on my Mac. But there are other options out there. For example, you can use the free Adobe Reader. And if I want to annotate this, it's as simple as, for example, selecting a highlighter and highlighting things that I might want to highlight. So this is simple annotation of notes. I could also choose to underline. President, first vice president, that could be useful terminology. It's a kind of simple annotation that I could do that might be interesting for preparation. I could choose to add in some text. Let me create a text box. Oh, there it is. This is a sample text annotation, right? And there are lots of different possibilities. I could even write on here, whoops, that's the wrong one. I could even write on the document scribbling here. So yes, it's a great way to go paperless. And I wanted to show you now how that might be relevant if you're working with consecutive notes. This is a set of my consecutive notes from my training when I was working on Portuguese from a few months ago. And these are my notes. You can see they're not that great. I'm actually going to ask you to critique them later on in the session. They're the same notes you're going to see. But let me make sure you see the right window. My apologies. I only shared one window with you. I should have just gone ahead and shared my entire desktop. So here it is. Thank you for letting me know. Now you should be able to see these notes. And I could do exactly the same thing where if I want to add some text to my notes, I could simply go in and add a little comment here. This is a good point to bear in mind, or I could circle something that I wanted to come back to later. So this is a very simple introduction to how you might use your computer to annotate notes. A little bit later on, we're going to be talking about how you can use your tablet, and I think you have a bit more flexibility when you're doing that. I find it much easier to write with a stylus, but in any case, I just wanted to say that for those of you in the room who don't have a tablet, and we know that there are many of you who don't, you have this possibility to take your notes, digitize them, and then annotate them just from your computer, which is quite convenient indeed. So that was our little demo that we had there. And now we'd like to transition to the next part of our webinar, which is about taking notes on your mobile device. And I'm going to turn it over to Alex for that.
Yes, thanks very much, Josh. I just heard you use the S word, stylus. So I was wondering if we should show people our little stylus collections that we have on both parts of Tech Forward HQ. So this is mine.
That sounds like an excellent idea.
You can see I have quite a big collection of, and those are not even all of them. I have quite a big collection of styluses that I've accumulated over the years for testing purposes and demonstration purposes. And I think it's actually quite a nice segue into the next segment of this webinar, because we have to make, yeah, thanks for showing that, Josh. I think
got all sorts of styluses here.
Yeah,
big fat one like this one. Lots of options.
Because we have to point out that if you're getting really serious about taking notes, and certainly handwritten notes, of course, that's what we almost exclusively have in mind here. If you want to do that on your mobile device and on your tablet, you'll want to get a stylus. There are different versions of styluses out there. You've just seen it. We have a big collection here. You don't need that big of a collection. We have some favorites as well, but just to say in general, there are two big categories of styluses: the active styluses and the passive styluses. I think the active ones you may have heard of are, for example, the Apple Pencil. That's this one, which connects to the Apple iPad. So both devices are aware of each other, and that provides a lot of additional functionality. For example, you can leave your hand on the screen without it making any smudges, because the iPad will only accept the input from the pencil. Then that makes it much more ergonomic for longer note-taking sessions as well. You'll get a similar experience with the Surface Pen if you use a Windows or a Microsoft Surface device. And of course, there are some other systems out there as well. But certainly, if you want to get into annotating documents, highlighting, taking handwritten notes, I think a stylus is almost essential. And then it kind of depends on what device you have. Again, if you have an iPad and it works with the Apple Pencil, check your device. That is probably the best connection, the best pairing that you can get, although it's probably not the cheapest one, but it certainly works the best, at least in our experience. So that the device that you have should probably inform the stylus that you get. And just a quick remark on the Surface, to the Surface users among you, I just got a Surface recently and bought one of these cheap copies of the Surface Pen. I don't recommend doing that. It's not a great experience, so you might actually want to get the real Microsoft Surface Pen. It's a much better experience. So when it comes to the actual software that you use for note-taking, of course, in this case, you know that when it comes to the iPad, you already have a note-taking app available. Let me just show that to you real quickly on my iPad right here. I am talking about Apple Notes, of course, which you should now be able to see on the screen. And I'm sticking with the topic of getting food on the table during the pandemic. So here you can see a sub notebook basically in my Apple Notes, where I have a collection of recipes. We talked about recipes in another webinar already, so it seems to be a bit of a thread here between Josh and me. Anyway, as you can see in Apple Notes, it's very easy to have not just text, but also links, images, sort of different kinds of formatting available. You can have checklists, even a table. I don't know if you can see that in here, but it's a very easy, very multimedia kind of thing. You can also add photos, and you can even scan in documents. So in a similar vein to what we mentioned in the beginning in terms of digitizing, so that you can do in Apple Note. Apple Notes as well. It works really, really well. And of course, you can also use your stylus and use it here in Apple Notes as well. You can see all the tools that are available with your Apple stylus at the bottom. And that, again, of course, comes free with every iPad, and you can then also use these notes from a Mac if you have one, or from an iPhone. But actually, if you're getting really serious about note-taking, you might want to take a look at Notability, which for a few years already has been the absolute favorite note-taking app for both Josh and me, which we use for consecutive notes, for general meeting notes, and for all kinds of other things. So for example, I'm still in the process of learning Russian at the moment. And for me, it's still a bit easier to have handwritten Russian. I still find it difficult to type. So I just do that in Notability because it's so much easier to do. And just to give you a very, very brief overview of how it works. So once you open a new app, you get a very simple screen. You get just a white piece of digital paper, if you will. And then on the top of the screen, you have basically the essentials. First of all, you can have typed text, of course, where you can just enter text on the screen like that. So you could type with the software keyboard or with an external keyboard if you wanted to. Then, of course, you can just write with your stylus or Apple Pencil or your finger if you wanted to start out simple. And then, of course, the advantage of having digital tools is, again, the flexibility. So lots of different colors, different pen strokes. You can customize as much as you like. Then you get highlighters as well, which work well for, well, obviously, highlighting. You get a little eraser, so you can go in and erase everything that you've noted or written down. Again, let me just write something here. This is a test. And then I can even have a little lasso here. I can rearrange things. It's very, very easy to use. And they also have this little presentation mode now, which I think for Josh and me is going to be handy during future seminars and webinars. And then, of course, you can change the paper if you like. You can change the background color. You see, you have a lot of options here. And Notability does not only work for starting a note from scratch. You can also import a PDF and annotate the PDF, draw on the PDF, write on the PDF, whatever you want to do. It's actually very, very easy. So a big hands up there for Notability. And maybe for those among you who are also teaching and maybe using Zoom to provide teaching or training for others, you saw here how easy it was to also share your mobile device in Zoom. This, of course, also works with other platforms. But the reason we're mentioning it here is that it can be used for pedagogical purposes as well. So to share somebody in the process of taking notes, for example, and there are quite a few really cool possibilities for teaching purposes. If you're more of an Android user, of course, I found that the Samsung Notes experience is actually very good because it works both for typed text, for recording audio, if you like, but also entering drawings or handwritten texts, especially with the S Pen, which is sort of the standard stylus that comes with a lot of Samsung devices, which works very, very well. OneNote is also a good note-taking experience on all the platforms, so both Apple and on Android, and of course also its native Windows platform. And then again, if you're using a Windows tablet or a Windows convertible, then I think also OneNote is probably your best choice. And I'm still in the process of exploring OneNote. It has a lot of options. You can type, you can record, you can use a stylus. It has a lot of different features that you might want to explore, maybe right after this webinar, to go into more details. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Josh.
Yes, in fact, we wanted to ask you another question here, but the question is, what do you think about potentially using a tablet for taking consecutive notes? What would the experience be like? What do you think it could work for you? What kind of difficulties could you envision? Let us know what you think, and if you're already doing it, feel free to share your experiences as well. In the meantime, as you're answering the question on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and answer a question that came in to us, which was, does Notability come with an infinite scrolling function? Yes, Notability can be set up for infinite or unlimited scrolling. So you just keep scrolling down the page. You're going to see that actually from the notes I share later.
It's the default even, I think, but they now have both options as well, which is great.
Exactly, you can do it either way. So I see Bea uses her tablet for Consec and she says she loves it. Some people say it might be a little bit too heavy to use an iPad. I think in my experience, it depends on if you're working on a table or if you're standing. If you're working on a table, the iPad is just like putting a pad on the table, but if you're standing, it can be a little bit heavier. I am pretty used to it anyways, but I understand that point. Some people are scared of accidentally deleting their notes. I did quite a bit of research on this actually a couple years ago, and you can find all that on my academia.edu page. And one of the things I found was that people said they were afraid about losing their notes, but in reality, that had never happened to anybody. Simply practicing a few times in advance meant that they didn't have any such problems when they were doing it. So yes, some people think it could be tricky, but it's certainly possible. There are some setting-specific differences. I see that comment from Kirsty, and you can read more about that. I think a lot of you are also posting your comments just to the panelists. You might want to share them to all panelists and attendees so everybody else sees your ideas. You can switch that setting
just for everyone. That's
exactly to everyone in the Zoom chat settings. So I just wanted to say that. So yes, there are differences. Some people might find it a little bit heavier. Some people might be used to what they've done in the past. Some people wonder if the stylus is as reliable as using a pen. In my experience, it actually is. But I would agree with Didier that it takes some time to get used to working on a tablet for consecutive note-taking. Some people are saying it was just as fast or even faster. I say that's what Ellie's saying. And yes, I agree. It certainly depends what stylus you're using, what tablet you're using, and so on. So great. I think we've seen a lot of thoughts and ideas about potentially annotating on a, or taking notes on a tablet. And now I'd like to show you another example, which is how you can go and annotate your notes on a tablet. So I am simply going to pull up some of my notes. Let me do that right here. All right, we've got some notes. Perfect. I will share my screen with you and show you what this looks like. So here it is, sharing my screen. Hopefully you can all see it in just a second. And there we go. So here's my screen. I'm just going to turn it vertically since, oops, no, we'll leave it horizontally. And I can simply scroll looking at my screen. So here's some notes, and then I could choose to select the pen. You can't see it on the screen right now, but I'm just telling you I'm picking a pen. I've picked green, and I could simply say, well, actually, in this part, you've written out a whole 2 words, right? Animal test. That might not be the best way of going about it. And I could say shorter if I wanted to write myself a note like that, so that in the future, I keep my notes shorter. Of course, I could also type that the same way, right? I've got a little box, I type shorter, and it's right there. But I actually don't really like this option at all. I much prefer just using a stylus to annotate. It's much more natural. And you can see that I did what some of you were talking about before, which is when you make a little mistake, you can go in when you're listening to your rendition again, if you're learning a new language, which was the case here. I didn't quite have the exact translation of the culinary specialty we were talking about in Portuguese. So I crossed it out and wrote in that bolachas should actually be cookies, not cake. And there are other places in my notes where, for example, I would scribble in a few things that I left out, things like that. So that's a very simple explanation of how you can annotate on your notes. And I will stop sharing my screen there. I think you've gotten to see what that looks like. Actually, there was one other thing that I wanted to show you, so I will share my screen again, and that was the idea of converting written notes into text. Now, this is a really cool feature built into Notability. Let me just show you how it works. And they're up. You should now be able to see the notes. And I use these little scissors at the top. You can't actually see them right now, but it's okay. And I draw around the thing that I want to cut. See if you're seeing that. I'm not sure if you can actually. And I click on it and I click convert to text. Shows me a conversion preview and I click convert selection and there it is. So with the view that you could see, you couldn't actually see me going through all of the steps, but nevertheless, you saw how I was able to convert that word position into text right there. So that's an additional idea. When you are annotating on a tablet, you could go ahead and convert something. And then, where I had my notes earlier, I want this word to be stored. So I will convert it to text. And see, it has a problem here, actually, because I picked a word in Portuguese, and it doesn't know how to handle it because it was set for English. The way that this is set up, it actually looks at the language that you've configured Notability or your iPad for. But in any case, that's just a few examples of some interesting things that you could do. And I wanted to say, also, I wanted to draw some ideas for teaching, for those of you who are teachers in the room, or for those of you who are simply practicing at a distance. You saw that I was able to very easily use my stylus in a different color to mark things up. You can do exactly the same thing with somebody else's notes. If a student wanted to share their notes, you could mark them up. If a peer wanted to share them, you could also say, well, right here, maybe it would be better for you to tweak that. The symbol's not all that clear, and so on. So that was what I wanted to say about that. And I think this brings us to another question we had for you all, which was, what potential differences do you see between annotating on a computer and annotating on a tablet? Which would you prefer and why? So you can head right over to that chat box and tell us what potential differences you see. We're doing our best to keep up with all of the messages streaming in through the chat. I looked up and explained something, and there were 50 messages I'd missed, but we'll try to go ahead and read out as many as we can. So some people say, Renee says a tablet is portable. Isabel says a touchscreen is faster. Corinne prefers a larger screen for annotation. A computer could be bigger and heavier. I'm seeing from Marit, tablets are more portable. You can do much more when annotating on a tablet. People are saying it's way easier to annotate on a tablet, and it's much less frequent probably to annotate on a computer or a PDF editor. I see a comment here from Ramona about keeping your notes later, and we're actually going to get to that in just a minute. Question, can you use a stylus on an Apple computer? No, styluses only work on touchscreen devices, and Apple computers are not touchscreen, so that's a very good question. And yes, very good point, Mariana. You'd like to use a tablet, but you need to practice. Absolutely, that's one of the things we always tell people is make sure to practice many times before you take this out on assignment with you. So that was the end of what we wanted to say on this point. And I think this brings us to the idea of creating a portfolio of digital notes. Alex, did you want to share some thoughts on that?
Sure, absolutely. I was just busy replying to a few more questions here because some people are using the Q&A, which is also a great idea, which we should probably be using a little bit more because it's somewhat more structured than the Zoom chat, which can get very fast moving there, obviously. I just saw an interesting question here. What is the technique with digital note-taking if you need to ask the speaker a question before starting interpreting? I think Josh may have partially answered that. That it's basically about finding your place in your consecutive notes. So you could, for example, highlight that with a different color, with a big stroke, for example, or for example, in Notability, you could also go in and create a bookmark, which is something that we didn't really have the time to show, but Notability lets you create bookmarks for individual pages, which is also a great way, especially for longer segments where you can find your place later on, for example, when you have a question to the speaker. But let's get back to the portfolio of digital notes. I mean, that's something, for example, that some of you have touched on, is having that corpus of notes available. And of course, that works very well for creating a portfolio for education purposes, for example, because you always have that personal notes archive available. And I don't know if you were able to see that earlier when I showed my Notability screen, is that you had these dividers on the left. So basically like categories or folders, if you will. And if you use a different note-taking app, usually it will use the metaphor of a notebook. So in the app, you have different notebooks, and one notebook can contain different notes. For example, a recipe notebook can contain, several hundreds of recipes if you're a very passionate cook, for example. And that gives you a way to structure your notes, to stay on top of how they are organized, and you can also create a portfolio. And what you can use for that as well, if you were to have that portfolio elsewhere, for example, if you're enrolled in a university course, you may have a learning management system like Moodle or Blackboard where this should be done. And then, of course, note-taking apps easily let you export your notes, usually as a PDF. That's just a file that is very easy to use, very easy to handle. I think all the note-taking apps know how to export something to a PDF, so that's very easy to do. And then you can upload it to your learning management system or your cloud storage solution as well. There are many more exporting features. For example, Notability knows a thing or two about audio as well. So you could even export that audio, which is great for interpreting practice, for example. That's something that you should bear in mind as well. So for that portfolio idea. There is, however, another idea, and that is something that we keep developing during these free webinars and live online courses that we're doing at the moment. And it's the idea of having a feedback database. Again, that is something for those of you who are either students themselves or still involved in teaching, or who just want to keep track of how they are getting better over time with deliberate practice, or maybe you're working in a practice group with peers. And then this idea of a feedback database could come in very handy. And Josh and I have already prepared something for you to get you started and to let you know how this works. So Josh, why don't you explain that to us a little bit?
Sure, but I think maybe it would make more sense to actually do the exercise we have prepared for people. We're going to share with you my notes. I'm also putting the link in the chat so everyone can just click on it. So the first link is to get my notes. It's just 4 pages of notes from a whole long day of practice. And then we have this feedback form. That's the second link that we've pasted into the chat. And the idea of this feedback form is, well, this is a way that you could provide feedback. I mean, it's not perfect. That's not the aim by any means for it to be perfect. It's just an idea for different types of feedback that you might want to provide. So in that form, once you download my notes, you can see it says your name. This would be if you're filling it out. You cannot access the notes. All right, let me see if I can fix that. I know what the problem is, probably. 1 second. Just need to share. There we go. Anyone with the link can view. All right. So some people were able to get to them. If not, here's a longer link to the notes. You can click on that. So as I was saying, in this feedback form, we've got, it says your name. This is if you were using it for self-assessment. You can just pretend you're Josh. You're all self-assessing. You're all Josh. You're all looking at your notes, and you're all self-assessing your notes from this particular day. So you'd fill in the date. I know you're seeing Alex's screen right now. Maybe I'll just show you actually the feedback form while you're doing this. Let me put it right here for you so you can see it and share that with you. Okay, so now you should be able to see my screen. This is what the feedback form looks like. You should all be able to follow that second link we gave you and get there. You fill in the date, your name, you're Josh, obviously. In this set of forms we've created, they're customizable, so you'd be able to fill in your name, your aim, so what you want to work on in the session. Did you meet it? Yes, no, partially, and then you can just rate them. How was your structure? How legible were your notes? How clear were your notes? Were your symbols good or not? Were they concise as you were aiming for? What about markers, tenses, parts of speech, and so on? How good were you at details? Were your lists good? Not as good? What'd you do well? What could be improved? What do you want to work on for next time? And then in the bottom, I've got an attachment there, so you can attach anything you wanted. It could be a version of the notes that you marked up so that you can look at them again, or it could just be some handwritten things you jotted down. Next time I'd like to work on this, that, and the other, or it could even be, I don't know, audio and the notes from your practice session. So we're going to give you another minute or two for this exercise so that you can all look at my notes and all fill in the feedback form pretending that you're me. Now I see a question from Corinne. Do I do this after most assignments systematically? I think that I would do this more if I'm training than actually when I'm interpreting. Personally, I don't do this after assignments systematically, but some people might choose to. What tool did I use to create the feedback form? It's created with Airtable. Let me put another link to the form in here, just in case anybody is not managing to get to the form. Here's the long version of the link. Is Airtable free? Basic functionalities are free. If you go beyond it and have a very large Airtable with lots of data in it, then you might have to pay for it, but the basic function is free. And Airtable is web-based, so that works on any device. It's not on an iPad. It works on your computer, it works on your iPad, it works on your Android, it works on your phone, etc. So all of you should be able to fill that in right now. I think that was all of the questions that we got on this. I am glad to see that you like Airtable, Sharon and Mark. Yes, it's a very useful tool, and I think maybe now would be a perfect moment as you're finishing this to show you what Tech Forward has decided to make available to you for free through Airtable. These are different feedback forms that we've created for your interpreting practice or for your students' interpreting practice. So this is an Airtable universe page, which means it's just made available to everyone. And here you can see we have Tech Forward feedback forms for interpreting practice. Now there are 3 different forms in there at the moment. A self-assessment form, a peer or tutor assessment form, and a note-taking assessment form. That's the 3rd one that you just saw. And our idea is that it allows you to track your progress over time. There's all sorts of different filters and different ways of setting it up. And basically the idea is that if you're having lots of different students fill this in, you could see their feedback and then create special filters that only they see. So not the whole class seeing everybody's feedback, but just their own feedback and tracking it over time. If you're using this for your own personal practice, that would also be possible. If you're using it for a study group, you could also narrow it down. So we have different feedback forms in there. We talked about our self-assessment form, which is a kind of feedback diary, in our first webinar 2 weeks ago. And we also talked about the feedback form from Interpreters Help, which we copied over into here, which had lots of different ratings and ideas. So
Josh, while you're on that page, would you mind copying over the link into the chat just once more so people have it there?
Yes, great
Thanks.
idea. So here it is in the chat. And you'll see at the bottom of this page, it says, have any other great feedback forms? We're happy to add these to these templates and make them available publicly. So if you have other feedback forms that you would like in here that you're using, of course you can tweak the ones that are here, but there might be other types of feedback forms that you might want to create. So that is a possibility. And I see a lot of people saying, thank you. You're looking forward to trying this out with your students or for yourselves. It's our real pleasure to share this with you. Now we're coming up on the very end. Alex, do you want to quickly do the last slide we had planned?
That's not really the last slide, but I
Yeah.
think this is good at this point. We've been really geeking out these last slides, so maybe it's a good time to look at a few other solutions that are out there and that might be interesting for some of you. And I know that at least my co-host here is very much in love with one of the solutions that we want to share with you. Now, first of all, you may have seen in your local bookshop, for example, or maybe online, that Moleskine, the company whose notebooks a lot of people love and use every day in agendas and calendars and so on, Moleskine or Moleskine, I'm still not sure how to pronounce it. Anyway, they have what they call a smart writing set, which is basically a combination of their notebooks, a special smart pen or digital pen, and a Moleskine smartphone app or mobile app. So it works together as a complete system. So the way it works is that you can take the notes normally as you would with this pen in your Moleskine notebooks, but it's very easy to digitize them either through this pen, but I think the app also makes it possible to just scan pages in your Moleskine notebook or agenda, for example. Sometimes there's the possibility to have like little stickers and tags to send specific pages or specific notes to a specific destination. So if you still want this this good feeling of working on a piece of paper, this might be a good solution to look into if you're not quite ready yet, or you just don't want to switch to a tablet, for example, for note taking, which is perfectly fine, of course. And then we know that there is also quite a bit of interest in remarkable tablets. So those of you who have used a Kindle before or another e-reader, maybe from Sony or a different company, you will be familiar with what is called an e-ink screen. So if you've ever seen a Kindle, you know the writing is very crisp. It's very easy to use, even in bright sunlight. That's because of this e-ink technology. And the Remarkable company have turned this into a tablet where you can also use a stylus that comes with the tablet to take notes, handwritten notes, to annotate documents, to read PDF documents and other digital documents. So I haven't used it myself, but I know a lot of people who have used it really, really like the experience because it even sounds like paper when you sort of highlight with the stylus on the tablet. So that might be something to look out. I think they've just come out with the second generation device, so maybe it's a good point in time to get into that. And because all good things come in threes, let's tell you about another solution, the Rocketbook. But Josh knows much, much more about this, so I'll hand it over back to him.
Yes, I see several people in the room are also saying they love the Rocketbook. This is my Rocketbook. You can see it is a spiral-bound notebook. I don't use it for consecutive note-taking. I use it for when I'm in the booth on assignment. I jot down things, for example, lists of terminology. But look, I'm showing it to you on the screen, but I'm actually going to show it to you as it is designed to be done, because this is what's really cool about the Rocketbook. You can easily digitize your notes simply using your phone. So I am going to pull this up and show you. You're now seeing my phone. And this is the Rocketbook interface. I simply go down to the bottom and click New Scan. You can see my notes. This is actually just some Portuguese studying. And there we go. They've been digitized right there. They're a little bit small. I can just zoom in so you can see them a little bit better. Then I can save these notes and so on. It's very, very easy to do. So that's what I wanted to give you, just a very simple demo of this. You can scan them, you save them, pop them in your Dropbox, they auto-upload, for example. Lots of interesting possibilities with the Rocketbook. So we don't have much time to go into it in detail at the moment. I think we would like to start wrapping up this session because we are coming up on the hour mark. Of course, any more questions, you should feel free to pop into the chat box. And as you do so, we would like to say, we are bringing you these webinars for free. We believe strongly in training, but obviously the work that goes into them isn't free. So it takes us time to go out and research this to get the latest technology to share that with you. If you'd like to support what we're doing at Tech Forward, we would greatly appreciate anything that you can give us during this period. We know it's a very difficult period for everyone, but there's a donate link on our website on the webinars page, where we're also posting the videos to each webinar and the slides for each webinar. And if you would like to donate, we would very much appreciate it. Those donations help to keep up to date on the latest technology and prepare great educational content to share with you. Many of you have already donated in the last week. We very much appreciate that. And so thank you for chipping in and helping us out to keep Tech Forward alive and running and giving you lots of great content. And speaking of lots of great content, we wanted to tell you about what you can do to continue learning with us. We've added you all to our mailing list. You've probably already gotten a message or two from us over the last few days. We will continue to share information about our free webinars there. We also, in addition to this, have lots of other ways to keep up with us. For example, you can send us your ideas and questions using our contact form. You can head over to our website, techforward.com, to find lots more, including some on-demand courses that you can work through at your own pace. You can say hi to us on social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and now YouTube. And if we get a few more of you following us on YouTube, the live streaming process will be a lot simpler. You have to hit a critical mass before you can have a vanity URL. So if you're interested, follow us on YouTube as well. And finally, we wanted to tell you about our newest project, which is called Tech Forward Live. Tech Forward Live brings you our classic courses in an interactive online format. These are small group live sessions. We just ran our first one of these this week. We had a great group of students joining us to talk about glossaries. We took a deep dive into glossary management, terminology extraction, all sorts of really cutting edge topics about terminology. And we have 3 more sessions scheduled for the next 3 weeks. Next week is our classic tablet interpreting course, which I think we've been running for nigh on a decade now. Wow. In lots of different shapes and forms. And it's the first time we're going to be running it online, bringing it live to your living room. It's on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for 2 hours every day. And if you're interested, head on over to the Tech Forward Live page and feel free to sign up. We'll be talking about way more than we were able to cover in this short 1-hour webinar, from paperless preparation to digital note-taking to using your tablet in the booth. So it's not only about consecutive, it covers all aspects of an iPad and how it can be useful for you. In the weeks to follow, we have a New Frontiers in Interpreting Technology session. We'll tell you more about that next time, and you can read more on our website.
Forward to that one, yes.
And after that, we've got the tablet interpreting, but an Android edition coming up for you. So that is Tech Forward Live. And before you go, we would like to ask you for your feedback. Feedback is always very, very important for us. It helps us to continue to grow. I'm pasting in the link to that form. That's the long version of the link, so everyone will be easily able to get there from the chat box. For those of you who are following on the live YouTube stream, you can also fill this in. Maybe it's a scream or a screen, who knows. You just type xl8.link/webinar feedback into your web browser. It's all lowercase. It is case sensitive, but you can go there and fill that in and give us some feedback. What went well? What could be improved? What would you like to learn about in future sessions? I think that's it. I didn't see any other questions coming in.
We probably missed them among all the chat messages. I'm not sure.
Quite possible. This was.
Feel free to share them later.
This was an incredibly dynamic session. I know a lot of people weren't even able to join us in the chat room, but we're following along live on YouTube. As always, we'll share the recording with you afterwards so you can watch it again, try to continue learning about this in more detail. So I think we will start wrapping up here. And I will say it was a pleasure to have all of you with us from all across the globe. Thank you for joining us. And Alex, maybe you want to say some last parting words as well.
Yeah, you just said it was a very dynamic session. That was absolutely true, because when one of us was not on live, we were basically frantically typing and fixing things in the background. So sorry if it maybe wasn't quite as smooth, but we're still figuring out the live streaming thing. And next time around, it should already work much, much smoother. And as we've said several times, the slides and the complete recording will be available on our website, techforward.com. And you can check it out later. And we hope to see you soon on one of our webinars or live courses. Take care, everyone.